The crack echoed across the construction site like a rifle shot, sharp enough to slice through the roar of concrete mixers and diesel engines. For a heartbeat, every conversation stopped. Workers looked up instinctively, searching the maze of steel, pipes and scaffold platforms for the source of the sound. Most shrugged it off just as quickly. Construction sites were noisy places. Metal shifted, bolts groaned, equipment rattled. Strange sounds were part of the job, but one man didn't dismiss it. Everett Cole had already turned toward the scaffold before the echo had even faded. His eyes swept across the towering structure with the speed of someone who had spent decades reading steel, the way other people read books. Then he saw it. A diagonal cross brace near the center had begun to bow inward, and the bolt securing its upper connection had snapped clean through. Above it, 3 welders worked nearly 40 feet in the air, completely unaware that the platform beneath them had started, carrying a load it was never designed to support. Cole didn't hesitate. He strode toward the base of the scaffold, his boots crunching over loose gravel, his voice cutting through the noise with an authority that demanded attention. "Clear this area. Everyone back.
Move now!"
Several laborers glanced at him but didn't react. They were more confused than alarmed. Standing between stacks of lumber and pallets of concrete bags, Cole looked more like a retired contractor than someone in charge. His gray flannel jacket was dusty around the sleeves, his boots stained white with old concrete powder, and the badge clipped low on his belt was almost hidden beneath the jacket. At 66 years old, he hardly looked like someone about to take control of an emergency, yet his expression carried none of the uncertainty around him. He knew exactly what he was seeing, and he knew exactly how little time remained before disaster. Foreman. Dale Kessler stepped directly into Cole's path with an irritated look. "Who the hell are you?" he demanded. Cole didn't slow down. "City Inspector. That brace is failing. Get your men off that platform immediately." Kessler folded his arms. "Funny. Nobody told me about an inspection today." He glanced toward the scaffold for barely a second before looking back. "And I don't take orders from random people walking onto my site." Cole kept his eyes fixed on the bending steel overhead. "I'm not asking for permission. That brace bolt has already sheared. The support cable next to it is frayed. If the load shifts another few inches, the platform comes down with everyone standing on it." Kessler laughed under his breath. "That scaffold passed inspection 2 months ago. It's perfectly fine." He pulled out his phone as though the conversation had already ended. "Security!" he barked into it. "I've got some old guy pretending to be an inspector." Cole inhaled slowly, refusing to waste precious seconds arguing. 2 months is exactly the problem, he replied evenly. Since then you've increased the load, added equipment, and ignored visible fatigue in the support members. Steel doesn't care what passed inspection 60 days ago. Around them, several workers had stopped what they were doing to watch the confrontation. None of them knew who to believe. The foreman had been running the site for over a year. The stranger looked convincing, but appearances weren't enough to override authority. 2 security guards hurried across the muddy lot. One reached Cole first. "Sir, you'll need to leave the premises." Cole didn't move. Instead, he slowly pulled out his phone and began dialing. "Touch me," he said calmly, "and you'll be obstructing a city safety official during an active hazard response." The words landed harder than anyone expected. The younger guard hesitated. The older one looked uncertain. Before either could respond, Cole continued speaking into his phone while never taking his eyes off the scaffold. "Possible structural failure. Immediate response requested. 3 workers remain elevated. Estimated failure window under 2 minutes." A young apprentice named Marcus Vale had been unloading steel tubing nearby. He looked up where Cole was staring and noticed the same bowed brace. Suddenly he remembered hearing an odd creaking sound since lunchtime whenever the wind pushed against the scaffold. At the time, everyone had blamed loose planks. Now he wasn't so sure. His stomach tightened. "Dale," Marcus said quietly. "He's right. That brace has been making noise all afternoon." Kessler spun toward him. "Nobody asked you. Get back to work." Marcus opened his mouth to argue, then looked back up. The bow in the brace seemed even worse now. It wasn't his imagination anymore. Something was changing. 40 feet above them, one of the welders paused, between beads, and finally noticed the crowd gathered below. He lifted his welding helmet and frowned. He couldn't hear the shouting over the generators, but he could see everyone pointing upward. Following their gaze, he looked toward the brace only a few feet from where he stood. His face drained of color instantly. Even from up there, he could see the twisted connection plate beginning to separate from the frame. He yanked off his headphones and shouted to the other 2 welders. All three abandoned their equipment and rushed toward the access ladder. Cole looked around desperately. Every second counted. Waiting for permission would kill people. Then he spotted the site's emergency evacuation horn hanging from a fence post beside the first aid station. Without asking anyone, he crossed the yard in 3 quick strides, grabbed the horn and slammed the alarm. The long blast echoed across the site. Training took over. Workers dropped tools immediately and moved away from the scaffold exactly as safety drills required. Even those who had doubted Cole instinctively obeyed the signal. The 3 welders raced down the ladder, boots striking each rung faster than seemed possible. One nearly slipped halfway down but caught himself before continuing. Below, Marcus waved frantically, urging them to hurry. Kessler stood frozen, his phone hanging uselessly at his side as realization slowly replaced disbelief. Cole never blinked. He counted silently in his head, watching the twisted steel strain under impossible pressure. The platform groaned again, louder this time. The last welder jumped from the final rung of the ladder, stumbling as his boots hit the muddy ground. Marcus grabbed his arm and pulled him farther away without thinking. For one impossible moment, the entire scaffold seemed to freeze. The twisted brace held, the steel cables vibrated, and everything went strangely quiet. Then the sound came, a deep metallic groan that rolled through the structure like thunder trapped inside iron. Everett Cole didn't move. His eyes never left the failing connection. "Keep moving," he shouted. "Nobody stops until you're beyond the safety perimeter." Workers who had hesitated a moment earlier now broke into a run, scattering across the site. 4 seconds after the last man cleared the danger zone, the brace snapped completely. The upper platform lurched sideways, and nearly 200 pounds of steel decking folded in on itself. Pipes, tools, welding equipment, and heavy planks crashed to the ground in an explosion of dust and twisted metal. The impact shook the earth hard enough that loose gravel danced across the pavement. A steel beam slammed into the exact spot where the welders had been standing only moments before. Silence followed. Even the concrete mixer seemed insignificant compared to what everyone had just witnessed. Nobody spoke for several seconds. Workers stared at the collapsed scaffold with pale faces, struggling to understand how close they had come to watching 3 men die. One welder slowly removed his gloves and looked down at his shaking hands. Another simply sat in the mud, unable to stand. Marcus bent over with his hands on his knees, breathing hard. Dale Kessler remained rooted to the spot, still holding the phone he had used to call security. His mouth opened as if to say something, but no words came out. He looked at the wreckage, then at Everett Cole, then back at the wreckage again. Finally he whispered, You knew." Cole's expression didn't change. There was no satisfaction, no anger, no triumph, only the tired look of someone who had seen too many accidents that should never have happened. "I told you," he answered quietly. 90 seconds. His phone was still connected. He lifted it back to his ear without taking another glance at Kessler. "This is Inspector Cole at Site 14 on Ferris Road," he said calmly. "We're declaring an emergency stop work order effective immediately. Confirm a structural response team, engineering investigators, and city enforcement officers. We have experienced a major scaffold failure with 3 workers, narrowly escaping fatal injuries." He paused to listen before continuing. "Yes, I also want every inspection report, maintenance log, and permit filed by this contractor over the last 2 years waiting when I arrive back at the office." He ended the call and slipped the phone into his pocket. Kessler swallowed hard before stepping forward. "Inspector, I didn't realize—" Cole looked directly at him for the first time since the argument had begun. "You realized enough," he replied. "I identified myself twice. You decided my appearance mattered more than my warning." Kessler lowered his eyes. Around them, workers who had once ignored Cole now watched him with a mixture of gratitude and disbelief. One of the welders walked over slowly. "Sir," he said, his voice unsteady, "if you hadn't sounded that horn—" He couldn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Everyone already knew how it would have ended. 20 minutes later, the sound of approaching engines echoed down the access road. 3 city enforcement trucks rolled through the construction gate, followed closely by a black SUV. The vehicles stopped beside the collapsed scaffold, and officials stepped out carrying clipboards, cameras, and emergency equipment. Then the woman from the SUV emerged wearing a gray blazer with a city identification badge. Already in her hand, she walked directly toward Cole. "Commissioner," she said, "structural response team is 15 minutes out. Emergency enforcement officers are securing the site now." The single word spread across the construction yard faster than the collapse itself. "Commissioner." Workers exchanged stunned looks. Even the security guards who had tried to remove Cole took an involuntary step backward. Kessler's face lost what little color remained. "Commissioner?" he repeated weakly. "You're the commissioner?" Cole nodded once. "Head of the city's building safety department." Kessler looked as though the ground had disappeared beneath him. Moments earlier, he had threatened to remove the very man responsible for enforcing every construction safety regulation in the city. Worse still, he had ignored repeated warnings that nearly ended 3 lives. "Sir, I had no idea who you were," Cole answered with a calm that somehow carried more weight than shouting ever could. "That's exactly the problem. Safety isn't supposed to depend on recognizing someone's title. If a laborer, an apprentice, or a passerby points out an immediate hazard, your first responsibility is to check it, not to judge whether the person looks important enough to listen to." The investigation began before the structural engineers even arrived. Officials photographed every damaged connection, collected broken bolts, and sealed off the entire work zone. As engineers examined the collapsed scaffold over the following hours, disturbing facts began to emerge. The platform had been carrying far more weight than its approved load limit. Inspection stickers had been altered. Daily safety checklists contained identical handwriting for dates when different supervisors were supposedly responsible. Maintenance records showed repairs that had, by the end of the week, investigators uncovered 2 previous near-miss incidents that had never been reported to city authorities. Internal emails revealed repeated warnings from workers who had complained about unusual movement in the scaffold, only to be told to finish the job first. The evidence painted a picture of shortcuts, ignored warnings, and paperwork designed to hide growing risks rather than fix them. The consequences came swiftly. The company's operating license was suspended pending a full review. Heavy fines followed. Insurance providers launched their own investigations. Several supervisors faced disciplinary hearings for falsifying official safety records. Dale Kessler was terminated before the final report was completed and later named personally in multiple safety violations for ignoring an active structural hazard. During interviews with investigators, dozens of workers admitted they had often stayed quiet because they feared retaliation if they reported problems. That culture changed overnight. Marcus Vale found himself called into City Hall a few weeks later. Expecting another interview, he instead found Commissioner Cole waiting with a small folder. Cole thanked him for speaking up when others stayed silent. "It takes experience to recognize danger," Cole said, "but it takes character to speak when everyone else tells you not to." Inside the folder was an offer to join the city's structural inspection trainee program after completing his apprenticeship. Marcus accepted without hesitation. Years later, he would tell new inspectors that the most important lesson he ever learned wasn't about steel, bolts, or engineering calculations. It was that courage sometimes begins with simply saying, "Something doesn't look right." Several months later, Commissioner Everett Cole stood before reporters announcing new construction safety enforcement powers designed to prevent similar incidents. New regulations increased surprise inspections, strengthened whistleblower protections, and imposed harsher penalties for falsified safety records. When one reporter asked whether the Ferris Road collapse had inspired the reforms, Cole paused before answering. He never mentioned Dale Kessler by name. He simply looked into the cameras and said, "A warning doesn't become less true because the person giving it doesn't look important enough to matter. Every worker deserves to go home safely. Sometimes the difference between life and death is whether someone chooses to listen before it's too late." The room fell silent because everyone understood the message. 3 families had been spared unimaginable loss. Not because luck intervened, but because one man refused to walk away when everyone else dismissed him. Quiet professionalism, backed by experience and the courage to act, had saved lives. Sometimes justice isn't loud. Sometimes it arrives wearing a dusty flannel jacket, carrying years of hard-earned knowledge, and refusing to stay silent when seconds are all that remain.